Support provided by Walters, Papillon, Thomas Cullins, LLC, specializing in business litigation and personal injury cases for over 40 years.
I want you to know I stand here as the governor of the great state of Louisiana extremely optimistic about our future, but also very thankful for the successful year that we've had in Louisiana. I am proud of the progress that we have made by working together and continuing to put the people of Louisiana first. I can stand before you and say with absolute confidence that Louisiana is on the right track and much stronger, demonstrably stronger in many areas than we were 3 years ago. Because of the bipartisan compromise plan passed this summer, the days of crippling deficits are behind us. We are budgeting smarter, more honestly, and finally have the stability we need and the predictability that the state has needed for a long time. A $2 billion deficit has given way to a $300 million surplus at the close of last fiscal year. Credit rating agencies have removed the state from the negative watch list. Funding for higher education has been fully stabilized over the last 2 years. TOPS and GO grants are fully funded. And we were able to give the people of Louisiana a net reduction in their tax burden from last fiscal year to this one of $600 million. This was only the beginning of the momentum that we felt throughout 2018. Louisiana has enjoyed year-over-year job growth every month since October of 2017. In this year, we actually reached the lowest unemployment rate that we've had in a decade. Currently, Louisiana's employment is at a near record high with over 2 million people employed in Louisiana. Since the beginning of 2016, we've attracted 113 major economic development projects. These projects producing $30.7 billion in new capital investment for our state. And collectively, they're resulting in 27,500 new jobs while retaining more than 19,000 jobs at expanding employers across the state. Louisiana has the #1 manufacturing workforce in America in terms of productivity. And in fact, we're 33% more productive in the value added per hour of work than the #2 state, which is Texas. We've added nearly 5,000 manufacturing jobs over the past year. According to the latest report from the Federal Bureau of Economic Analysis, Louisiana's economy grew at a rate of 4.3% in the second quarter of 2018, outpacing the national average and posting stronger growth than all but 12 other states across the country, and we beat out 9 other states in the southeast region. Our GDP is at an all-time high at $250 billion in Louisiana presently. In the first 2 quarters of this year, personal income growth in the state was among the highest in the nation. However, we've seen news just today that the impact of the tariffs from Washington are having on our economy exactly what was predicted and feared. As most of you know, Bloomberg issued a report over this past summer that said of all 50 states, Louisiana was positioned to suffer the most from a protracted set of tariffs, from retaliatory tariffs and trade disputes. And as a result, in July, I raised the issue with the president in a letter that I sent to him. I'm hopeful that Congress and certainly our congressional delegation will step in to alleviate some of the pain that these retaliatory tariffs in particular are causing on our petrochemical industry and our agricultural sector. And certainly I continue to call upon the president to resolve the trade disputes as quickly as possible. Simply put, we've come too far in improving Louisiana's economy, creating more opportunity and more prosperity to let this get in the way of continued progress. With respect to transportation, we continue to take more innovative approaches to addressing our long neglected infrastructure. In the past year, DOTD has put 308 projects up for bid. That's a total of nearly 820 miles of progress in the works just this year. For the first time ever, we were able to secure $600 million in Garvey bonds to allow the state to construct a substantial portion of the I-10 reconstruction and widening from the Mississippi River Bridge to the I-10-12 split here in Baton Rouge, a new interchange on I-10 in Kenner at Loyola Drive to service the new terminal, the airport terminal that's being constructed there at a cost of about $1 billion. And that terminal, by the way, should be in use come May of next year. We also are constructing new access from I-20 directly into Barksdale Air Force Base in Bossier City. Garvey bonds will also provide up to 10% of the financing for a public-private partnership that DOTD is undertaking in Plaquemines Parish to replace the Bell Chase Bridge and Tunnel. This will be the first project ever that DOTD is using this approach and this innovative contracting method to deliver infrastructure in Louisiana. This project also benefited from $45 million from the Federal Department of Transportation in an infra grant, which is incredibly important to advancing that project. And this is just a snapshot of the many announcements and groundbreakings, ribbon-cutting ceremonies that we've had this year to make our roads safer and more efficient. We're also working to improve health outcomes for the people of Louisiana. Over the past 2 years, and largely because of Medicaid expansion, we've taken what were previously patches of care throughout the state and woven them into a patchwork quilt of nearly complete coverage. This coverage has allowed about 480,000 working poor people to access health care coverage that they otherwise would not have, had never had in their lives for the most part, and actually thought was not possible. As a result of the Medicaid expansion, more than 56,000 women, many of them for the first time ever, have received mammograms. Unfortunately, over 550 of those women have been diagnosed with breast cancer. Over 31,000 adults have received screening for colon cancer, and colon polyps were removed from more than 10,000 people across the state of Louisiana. And what we can say is those were cancers averted in those 10,000 people. And unfortunately, 400 adults were diagnosed with full onset of colon cancer, but all of these people can now start receiving the treatment that they need, and the diagnosis came earlier than would have otherwise been the case, so that the diseases have not progressed beyond where they were when they were diagnosed. That allows the treatment to be more effective and more cost-effective as well. The state budget has benefited from hundreds of millions of dollars in savings because of Medicaid expansion, most of which come from the enhanced federal match rate from that expansion. In fact, we've saved more than $300 million state general fund over the last 2 years. In the first year of expansion, Louisiana leveraged an infusion of $1.85 billion in federal funds that was invested in every community across the state of Louisiana and produced an economic impact of $3.57 billion and created more than 19,000 jobs. We've seen a dramatic drop in uninsured non-elderly adults. According to recent research from LSU, in 2015, nearly 23% of this population was not insured. After 2 years of Medicaid expansion, by 2017, that number was 11.4%, half of what it was 2 years before, and the lowest uninsured rate ever in the history of our state. A state with more insured people is a healthier state, and it shows in the numbers of people who now have access to life-saving preventive care. Residents are no longer delaying care because of the lack of health insurance coverage, and that is a good thing. We're also one of the very few states in the South that have not seen a rural hospital closure because they're dispensing less unreimbursed care. We're also in the midst of implementing the most comprehensive bipartisan criminal justice reforms in the state's history. These evidence-based reforms focused on nonviolent, non-sex offenders, and they've worked in other states, and we expect the same successful results here in Louisiana. And the data that we are seeing thus far is very encouraging. These reforms promise to cut Louisiana's crime rate, reduce recidivism, and make Louisiana a safer place for generations to come. The recent overwhelming bipartisan support by the U.S. Senate for criminal justice reform further reaffirms that Louisiana made the right decision to get smarter on crime in Louisiana to improve public safety. Already, Louisiana has shed its title, and it was a title that it had the dubious distinction of having for decades, but we no longer have the highest incarceration rate in the nation. The state has already saved more than $12 million from the first full year of criminal justice reform, and we were disciplined enough. I insisted, the legislature made sure as well, that we reinvested 70% of the savings into proven programs to reduce recidivism and to support victims of crime. Over the next 10 years, the state is projected to save more than $260 million, 70% of which will be reinvested into programs that will continue to make Louisiana a safer place. Finally, and this is one of my favorite success stories to report, we've had a record number of children from our foster care system who have been adopted this year and will be spending Christmas with permanent, loving families. And in fact, for the third year in a row, Louisiana has set all-time records for adoptions out of our foster care program, most recently with 912 children being adopted by 631 families across the state of Louisiana. The new record represents an 18% increase over the bar set just last year, when 771 foster children were adopted by 548 families. And this is just the beginning. I've talked a lot about the momentum we've been experiencing throughout the state over the past year, and I am confident this progress is going to continue in 2019, and we will see even more prosperity for our great state. And I am mindful that we still have challenges across our state, but we are in a much stronger position to address those challenges than we were. That is why I remain bullish on Louisiana and more optimistic about our future than ever. And before I open the floor to questions, I just want to wish everyone here and everyone listening and watching a very merry and blessed Christmas this year. And I hope 2019 will be the best year ever for you and your family and for the great state of Louisiana. And with that, I am happy to take questions.
Governor, how confident are you about pushing through pay raises next year, especially in light of some of the opposition we've seen to some of the revenue estimates?
Well, I'm optimistic because if you talk to Republicans and Democrats in the House and in the Senate, there is near universal support for the pay raise. And specifically, we're talking about a pay raise of $1,000 per teacher and other certificated personnel, whether they're counselors or nurses, but also $500 per support worker. And the reason this is important is we have lost ground to the Southern average. 10 years ago, we were paying teachers at the Southern average in Louisiana. Today, we're $2,200 below that. 35% of our students are being taught by teachers who are not certified, or at least not certified to teach the subjects that they're teaching. And we know that the number one ingredient for quality education is to have a highly motivated professional teacher in that classroom with those young people. So the ability to attract and retain the highest quality teachers is critically important. You can't do that if you're not paying a competitive salary. And so the pay raise is incredibly important. I haven't heard a single legislator say they're not for it. Now, obviously, probably some differences of opinion out there about exactly how it should be done or so forth. So I'm optimistic it's going to happen. It's my number one priority for next year in terms of the legislative session. Now, it is true that the Speaker is not following what the other members of the Revenue Estimating Conference want to do, and that is revise the forecast in accordance with the projections coming from the economists who inform the REC. And that's an economist who works for the legislature, one who works for the administration, but also the economist on the panel, Dr. Richardson, believes that we need to increase the forecast because whether they increase it or not, the fact of the matter is revenue is coming in ahead of the forecast, ahead of the projections. Simply put, more people are working, making more money, and more businesses are more profitable in Louisiana than the economists had forecasted and built that revenue estimate on. And so they can refuse to recognize that because it does require a unanimous vote, but it doesn't change the fact that the economy is doing better and that revenue is coming in ahead of the forecast. It is my hope and, quite frankly, my expectation that as we get into 2019 and REC continues to meet, that the reality of the situation will take control and the revenue will be recognized, and that's what we will base our executive budget proposal on. And in fact, not just state general fund. They have to have an updated forecast as it relates to self-generated revenue and as it relates to statutory dedications. All of that informs the executive budget proposal that gets submitted to the legislature. And so I believe we're going to work through this. Quite frankly, I don't understand what the Speaker's rationale is, and it's the first time we've ever had a politicization of the REC process, which was a good government reform. Many of you probably too young to remember, but there was a time when the governor submitted a budget proposal but also submitted the revenue estimate. And that was taken away from the governor to make sure that it was put in the hands of economists and so forth. So I think we're going to work past this. I certainly hope so. The people of Louisiana need to do that, need for us to do that, I should say. And I'm optimistic we're going to get it done. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have the ability to include the teacher pay raise in the executive budget proposal if you don't get the revenue estimate to change? I mean, I know that there is a $160 million state general fund increase, so is that enough?
Yes.
So you can do it without
Well,
forecast change?
well, obviously, without the forecast changing, it becomes much more difficult. But again, I don't believe that, and you'd have to ask the Speaker whether he's trying to defeat a pay raise for teachers by not revising the forecast as has been recommended by the economists. I don't believe that's what he's trying to do. I certainly hope that's not what he's trying to do. I don't think that serves the people of Louisiana well, and I certainly know that the education community would not be pleased with that. But obviously it makes it much more difficult. But at the end of the day, without a revised forecast, the executive budget proposal is going to be a complete disaster because we have agencies that will have $0 in their budgets because they operate completely on self-generated revenue, for example, that has to be recognized every single year in its totality. And so if they persist in what they're doing, the executive budget proposal is going to be nastier than ever, which is another reason why I just don't think that that's going to happen.
Governor, what's your reaction to or concern about the Texas judge ruling on the Affordable Care Act?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to tell you that I've lost any sleep over it. It's a district court judge's decision. I think it's unlikely to be affirmed at the U.S. Fifth Circuit or by the Supreme Court, and I do believe it's going to play out by going to the Fifth Circuit and then to the Supreme Court. That's going to take close to 2 years. In the meantime, we've had announcements that came out of the Trump administration, out of the Department of Health and Human Services, particularly CMS, saying that nothing is going to change in the interim. However, I do know that we have 850,000 people in Louisiana with pre-existing medical conditions. I know that everyone that I've ever heard speak about this subject, whether they were supportive of the Affordable Care Act or not, whether they were Republicans or Democrats, have said that that's one part of the Affordable Care Act that they wanted to preserve. So it behooves us at the state level to do what we can in the interim to make sure people will be protected and have access to coverage if they have pre-existing conditions. And so we will be working on legislation in the upcoming session to give that peace of mind. And hopefully it will be put into state law but never really used, because at the end of the day, if the federal act is struck down, I just think it's going to wreak havoc across the country. You know, I hope the 850,000 people in Louisiana take this seriously, but don't become unduly alarmed, because there won't be any changes immediately as a result of what happened in Texas with that one district court judge. Yes, ma'am.
So you mentioned the policy proposals for next session
Yeah.
to protect the 850,000 of pre-existing conditions. What, if anything, can you do here in Louisiana to ensure that the 480,000 on Medicaid expansion, the
Yeah.
care coverage is protected should it really
Well, you know, there's actually a difference of opinion about whether what the district court did in Texas will impact Medicaid expansion. But we do know that without it, we're going to go back to having about a quarter of our people uninsured, a quarter of our adult population uninsured. We know that the budget will take a tremendous hit. We know that the progress that we've made in getting people access to care, preventive care and primary care especially, will be reduced. We know that people will resume going to the emergency room for routine care and treatment, which is what they've done in Louisiana for decades before Medicaid expansion, which is the most costly way to have a health care delivered, but it's also the least effective way to manage disease. So for all of those reasons and many more, it would be a disaster for our state. But the answer to your question is there's not much we can do at the state level to preserve Medicaid expansion if, in fact, a court decision renders the Medicaid expansion at the federal level in terms of the Affordable Care Act unconstitutional. I'm optimistic that's not going to happen, but I'm not naive enough to think that it's impossible that it will happen. Yes, sir.
Sir, where are these tariffs really coming home to
Yeah.
roost in Louisiana? Did you receive any response from the president when you
Yeah.
reached out? And in the year ahead, where are you hoping that he makes some adjustments?
Well, I just hope he will quickly resolve the disputes we're having primarily with China. We know that China buys an awful lot of our agricultural products as a nation, but here is in Louisiana. And what Bloomberg pointed out is it's not just the agricultural products that are produced in Louisiana, although it was very significant, especially if you go talk to the soybean farmers across the state of Louisiana. Many of them just plowed up their soybeans, left them in the field. There was no market for their product. This is the single biggest contributor to the report that came out today. So hopefully this will get resolved soon, and the retaliatory tariffs that have been imposed by other countries, but particularly China, will go away, and we can have a normal trade relationship with these countries. I think it will benefit us. But it's not just the grain that's produced in Louisiana. 60% of the nation's grain gets exported through the Mississippi River in our ports. A big percentage of the aluminum and steel that get imported come through our ports. And a huge percentage of the construction cost of a new chemical manufacturing facility or petrochemical manufacturing facility happen to be aluminum and steel. And so if the cost for those products goes up, so does their construction costs. They then have to decide whether they're going to go forward with the projects, reduce them in scale. They may have to go out and find new investors, and so it delays things. It's just not good for the nation's economy or our economy. It's going to be very helpful when this gets resolved. And again, I encourage the president to do that as quickly as possible. And I encourage the congressional delegation that we have in Louisiana to also register their concerns with the White House and with the administration over these tariffs. Yes, sir.
Yes. So obviously next year's an election year. So election policy.
Is it an election year?
There we go. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Obviously election policies and campaign policies will be, more attention than ever. Something you mentioned as of late, using possibility of using campaign funds for child care services. Would that be something that you'd like to pursue on a legislative level next year?
Yeah, let me be clear. I don't think we're going to have any more children here that would require child care. So this has nothing to do with my campaign for governor. But that decision that came from the Board of Ethics, I believe is contrary to a decision that the board had previously made. And I think for a parent who's got children at home, in order for them to be able to wage a campaign, that is a necessary expense that is incidental to and directly related to the running for that office. And so I hope they'll revisit that, and it seems to have a particularly punitive impact upon women. And we know in Louisiana and around the country, we have record numbers of women running for office. That is a good thing. We need to encourage that, and the decision from the Board of Ethics seems to me to unfairly target them and discourage their participation in the political process as candidates. And so I just hope that they will reconsider that decision. I know the Board of Ethics is comprised of good people, and I just think they got this one wrong. Yes, ma'am.
Governor, you started off this press conference with a lot of successes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, heading into the final year of your first term, what is something that you feel like you haven't been able to successfully accomplish that you would like to make a priority in this?
First of all, I like the way you phrased the question. This is the final year of my first term. No, I don't think it's any secret that I ran on, believe in, and have on multiple occasions asked the legislature to increase the minimum wage in Louisiana. That has not happened. I think that is a travesty. $7.25 is not a meaningful wage in 2018, and here we are about to be in 2019. The last time Congress addressed this was in 2009. If I'm reading the tea leaves correctly, Congress is completely out of the business now of increasing the minimum wage. They're looking for states to do it, and states across the country are in fact doing it. Very conservative states that I might add. And so a modest but meaningful increase to $8.50 over a couple of hours, over a couple of years, would be the right thing to do. Similarly, I believe that we ought to take action to eliminate the gender gap in Louisiana. You talk about unfair. We have the biggest disparity in the country in what we pay women compared to what we pay men when they are similarly qualified doing the same work. And it's about 66 cents on the dollar on average, but for women of color, it's about 50 cents on the dollar is what they're paid. And as a result, it's not fair to them, and we are trapping kids in poverty unnecessarily who are being supported by parents who are not earning what they should earn when they work. And so it ought to offend everybody, not just women. It ought to offend everybody that we have the biggest pay gap in the country based on gender. And so we've not been successful in getting the legislature to address this. We're going to continue because it's right. It's the right thing to do. Overwhelming majorities of the people of Louisianans, I should say, support an increase in the minimum wage and eliminating the gender pay gap. So we're going to keep fighting for it, but I'm very disappointed to stand here at the end of my third year and tell you we haven't been able to get that done yet.
One last question.
Yes.
Being very optimistic, talking about all the successes, but then you saw the report that came out that said we're losing population.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
Well, we were able to look into the numbers, and what we found out is we have an aging population, and we actually have people in Louisiana who are dying faster than they're being born. We don't have people en masse moving out of Louisiana, but what we don't have, and this is a real problem for us, is we don't have people moving in yet either. But the answer to this is that you create more opportunity, more prosperity in Louisiana that will attract people. What does that look like? That looks like growing your economy. That looks like having more jobs. It looks like having wages that increase, that actually can support families. And that's why the economic development projects that we've been announcing are so critically important. It's why it's important that we have the state's highest gross domestic product. The size of our economy is bigger now than it has ever been. We know that most recently it was growing faster than all but 12 other states, and we're beating out 9 other states in the Southeast. And so as we continue to create the conditions here that are favorable towards creating opportunity and prosperity, then we anticipate that this is a trend that will correct. We need for it to correct in Louisiana. You know, the fact of the matter is, if you go back to about 2005, and it really started with Katrina, we've had either negative or anemic population growth in Louisiana. We really need to reverse this, but the progress we're making, the momentum that I talked about earlier at this press conference is exactly what we need to be doing if we want people to move into Louisiana. They're not going to move here if there's not a job for them. They're not going to move here if the economy is not growing, if we're not landing foreign direct investment, for example, which we are at a record pace in Louisiana. So I acknowledge that it's a serious issue, but I believe we're already on the path that we need to be on in order to correct it. Well, I happen to be a country music fan, and I'm excited about the return to Baton Rouge of the Bayou Country Superfest. And of course, I'm not really supposed to pick Baton Rouge over New Orleans, but it seems to be a better fit at Tiger Stadium, and to play out over 2 days of the Memorial Day weekend. I happen to look forward. Have they released the lineup of artists who are performing yet? Okay, because I have an idea who it's going to be, but I can't say. I look forward to being there to enjoy some really good country music by one of my favorite artists, and I hope the people of not just here in Baton Rouge, but as you know, people come from all over the state and really all over the Gulf South to enjoy that particular event, and I'm looking forward to it. It does have a tremendous economic impact for Baton Rouge and the surrounding communities, but it also gives us a chance to highlight Tiger Stadium and the LSU campus, and it's just a good fit for what we do here. So I am excited about it, and I was able to tell the producer of that program that when he called me the other day, and he might or might not have told me who I can expect to be performing there. So look, thank you all for coming over today, and I do again want to wish you all a very Merry Christmas and the best New Year ever in 2019. God bless you.
Support provided by Walters, Papillon, Thomas Cullens, LLC, specializing in business litigation and personal injury cases for over 40 years.